Hey English 11, this is Lesson 4, Unit 1, and coming to you from my kitchen here, let's talk about enjambment. That is our goal today, is to analyze enjambment. That very well may be a new word for you. And so we're going to look at what that is, and also how to identify it in poetry, and why a poet might use enjambment to try to contribute to the overall message of the poem. So let's get started. Enjambment. You might want to just take that in. Enjambment. That's your new word for the day. It's one of our literary devices, which you should already have in your notes from going back to some of the initial videos from this unit. But enjambment is when a line of poetry runs over to the next line without punctuation at the end of the line. So the poet is using line breaks instead of using punctuation like periods, commas, and the poet is not splitting up sentences the way you would expect. So creating line breaks in order to send a message. If you look over here in this quick example, this poem is called We Real Cool. And it says, we real cool, we left school, we lark late, we strike straight, we sing sin, we thin gin, we jazz June, we die soon. So you notice enjambment is all over this poem because at the end of each line we have just the word we. And that's the first word of the sentence, but then we drop down to the next line right away. So we left school is actually one sentence and typically would be together. But enjambment is this poet cutting the sentence apart and dropping it to the next line and using a line break for that. So there's your first example of enjambment. So why does a poet use enjambment? What's the purpose? Okay, so the logical phrase is interrupted. When you read sentences and phrases, you have an expectation of what's coming next. And so when a poet then moves it to the next line, as you come to the end of the line, where there's the enjambment, you are kind of pushed forward to move down to the next line. Pushed forward because the phrase hasn't settled, the sentence hasn't ended. You're still kind of stuck right in the middle, and it just carries you along to the next line. So that's typically why a poet would do that and try to focus in on certain phrases or words in a poem. Okay? So in this quote, it talks about curiosity. You're curious, and so you hurry on because the pause is placed in what our brain thinks is the wrong place. It just keeps us interested and keeps us reading. So let's take a look at a Rupi Kaur poem with some enjambment. And I'll help you identify this one. This is your must-do part 2 practice. And the poem here is off to the side. And it says, whoops. There we go. Here's the poem. What if there isn't enough time to give her what she deserves? Do you think if I begged the sky hard enough, my mother's soul would return to me as my daughter, so I can give her the comfort she gave me my whole life? So you can see that the must-do is linked in on Schoology, which is actually the analysis right here. There's the poem. I'm not going to do the whole thing because Miss Heck already did an excellent walkthrough of how to do the poetry breakdown in the last lesson. So you should already know how to do that as far as looking at form and themes and perspective and all of that. But I just want to show you, where do you put in enjambment when you notice it as a literary device? So you see here, it's actually one of the examples that we have put inside the stylistic and authorial choices category. So in The Sun and Her Flowers, which is the poem I just read, where is the enjambment? So where are the sentences or phrases broken unnaturally. Well, there's a couple of places I could see. Let's go again through this one. What if there isn't enough time to give her what she deserves? Okay, so this one is split right here. There isn't enough time, enjambment, to give her what she deserves. I would probably consider that line enjambment. Do you think if I beg the sky hard enough, my mother's soul would, see how it takes you, takes you to that word, my mother's soul would, there's the enjambment to the next line, return to me as my daughter. Here's another example. So I can give her, enjambment, the comfort she gave me my whole life. So there's a couple of places with enjambment, and what you'll do is, down here, does the author use literary devices? Well, you may say, literary device, enjambment. Make sure I spell that right, there we go. And then I'll just go ahead and type out those couple of lines. I think the most important one I'll go with is, my mother's soul would return to me as my daughter. Oops, I shouldn't capitalize. Okay. And whenever I quote, make sure it's an exact copy of what she wrote. Okay, so enjambment there. And what does that have to do with the tone of this poem? Well, I think right in the middle of the poem there, you can see, my mother's soul would return to me as my daughter. She leaves you hanging on the end of that line because she wants you to consider what she's begging for and what she wants from the sky. She said, I beg the sky. Would my mother's soul, so what's she begging for? She's leaving you hanging. Uses that enjambment to force you to the next line to say, return to me as my daughter, and connect her message to the next generation, her daughter, in the final few lines of the poem. So that's where you'll put the enjambment when you find it. And then once you get down here, okay, so you'd say, example from the poem, we have it right here. I'm just going to go ahead and copy the quote down into this. And these lines are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, 1, 6, 7. So how does it contribute to the overall meaning? This literary device helps guide the reader from the author begging the sky to the connection with her daughter or the next generation. Okay, so that's the connection from her mother to her daughter and passing that along. Once you get to the global issues, you can speak to how she uses enjambment to speak to the global issue or address the global issue in the poem as well. All right, so this enjambment will become a part of your poetry breakdowns. Now that you know that enjambment is the unnatural, I would say unnatural, like separation of phrases and sentences into different lines in the poem. Okay, let me really quickly just go through the couple other things you need to know for this lesson. So this was the example together. You should do the entire poetry breakdown, and you know how to do that. And then the should do is just one more practice where I don't tell you where the enjambment is, so then you should be able to find that yourself and apply what we just talked about. And then aspire to do, if you're interested in a little challenge, create your own poem and use enjambment. At least 8 lines in your poem. Type your poem in the document for aspire to do. And that's something if you want to push yourself to the next step here of understanding and using enjambment. Finally, make sure that you do your mastery check. Your mastery check is, yes, a poetry breakdown to make sure that you can identify enjambment and that you can connect it to the message or the tone and mood of the poem, and that you can create a global issues practice statement based on what you find. So it's putting it all together and proving to us that you can do this. All right, that was about as quick as I could take care of this. Have fun reading and finding enjambment.